Alright, so, you've come to the conclusion that you want to make a model. But you're going to need stuff to do that. Let's start off with a basic X-Acto drive. Now, this is an X-Acto brand hobby blade, but you don't actually have to use an X-Acto brand. I personally prefer them, but you don't have to use them. I like something with a replaceable blade, because there's a whole bunch of different types that you can use, and you're going to want to get something that you can get multiple uses from. You get one with a fixed handle and a fixed blade, you're going to end up replacing it anyway, and it's going to cost you a whole bunch of money for no dang reason. I like something with a 45-degree angle, but there's a whole bunch of different types. This is a standard replacement blade kit. Now, I went to Hobby Lobby and paid a small king's ransom for these, but you can get them for fairly cheap. You're going to want to have a bunch of these on hand because you're going to burn through them. You want to have a sharp blade because a dull blade's going to end up getting you killed. You can go crazy with this stuff. I got a whole bunch of things on hand. Now, this is actually a woodworking kit I bought that I will use for my hobby purposes. There's a whole bunch of different blades here that I've never used. I'm not sure if I ever will use, but I kind of like it. Now, there's a bunch of things you can do with these. There's a bunch of different types of blades. I use maybe one or two of these actual blades, and if I'm honest, I don't generally use more than just the standard X-Acto knife blade. Something like this ends up being useful every once in a while, but it's a bitch to even get it out of the freaking casing. Come on out. Come on. You gonna come? Nope, you're not. You can tell I don't usually take this guy out of the packaging, but it is what it is. I fight for it for a little while, nearly stab myself in the throat in the process of trying to pull it out, and eventually pull it out just so that I can tell you I basically never use this guy. But it's actually fairly useful for gouging out large areas of foam core. More on that in a later episode. There's a whole range of things that you can do things with, whole range of different handles based on your personal preferences. I've never really found these to be too useful except to get me these other blades, and even then the ones I care about are the ones that I can put into a standard size X-Acto knife thing for what I do with my hobbies. I personally like using gloves. I work with a lot of weird chemicals as I'm going along in the process, and something to be a barrier between my hands and the chemical accelerants I use on glue, always a good day. I love a Dremel tool. I use pin vicing a lot with my smaller models, and there's nothing wrong with a standard hand tool version of this. You pop it open, screw it off. You will have a bit that fits in the end of it. It'll have one side that is for larger bits, one side that's for smaller bits. It's like a USB drive, so no matter how many times you do it, you're always going to try and put it in the wrong side first. Case in point. You put it in there, screw it on, and then once you got that little guy screwed in, you basically just hand drill it in. I get a lot of use out of this, but the truth is, I get a lot of use out of it mostly in places where I can't conveniently use a powered version of this, or if I'm trying to be quiet at night. If I can use the powered version of this, I generally prefer to use the powered version of this. This is a slightly upscale version of that hand drill. It is powered by a pair of AA batteries. It's the Mr. Hobby tool. I liked it when I initially got it, but I got it basically because I didn't realize that there were better options and was trying to save myself money. I think this thing cost me like $20-30 at a Japanese hobby store. I got a lot of use out of it at the time, but since then I've upgraded mostly to versions that I can plug into the wall, because I think that they're slightly nicer, and as you can tell, I'm going through this and trying to find a drill bit I can fit into it, because it really only takes very small drill bits, and even then it only takes a couple of different drill bit types. It's really intended to be used with Gundam models and a couple of smaller hobby train models. It's not very versatile. This is a Drill Master. It's the lowest quality thing that I think I'd actually willingly use nowadays, other than the hand tools. It can fit a wide range of drill bits. It's fairly simple. You just tighten them in, turn them on, but unfortunately, it's got two settings, on and off. So it's either moving at full RPM or it's not moving at all. Now, it does plug into the wall, which means you can use it for long periods of time, but if I'm honest, I don't like this over the options you have beyond this. It's something that you'll find at hobby stores a lot of the time that don't sell a Dremel tool, and even then, the cost-price difference between this and a larger Dremel tool is relatively negligible. If you're gonna buy a power drill, I would honestly suggest just shelling out the money for a Dremel tool. Dremel tools are good, they have a wide range of utility beyond your hobby projects, they have a ability to decide how fast or how slow you want the drill bit to be moving, it has a much greater flexibility in terms of what you can put in terms of a drill bit, and you can even put a handle in it to move it in and out of a wall. I can't say enough good things about it. It's just generally a nice thing to be working with. There are competitor model things. I think Hitachi makes one, and most companies that make power tools make some equivalent to the Dremel tool. I just personally have always owned a Dremel tool and like Dremel tools. I prefer a plastic glue from Testors. They used to have a metal nib for these. You can still sometimes find the ones with the metal nib. Honestly, if I can get one with the metal nib, I prefer to get one with the metal nib. Generally, they come like this now. If you go inside the packaging, it will have just the standard plastic nib along with a little metal round bit that you'll shove down this plastic nib so that you can still get glue out of it in an expeditious manner. I like it a lot. I vastly prefer this to anything that has a brush at the end of it. Tamiya does a lot of things with brushes at the end of it. I honestly can't stand those. And as much as I like Testors products, any of these things that comes in a tube is just begging for you to have a hobby accident. It's a much stronger glue. If I need something to stay in place for a longer period of time, I'll use this, but when it comes down to it, I prefer the little sort of square boxy thing for plastic models. Gorilla Glue makes a fairly decent super glue. I don't love the viscosity of this. It ends up being very sort of gooey, goopy, and because I use a lot of accelerant in what I do, I don't like the way that it bubbles when you put an accelerant on it. So it does a great job, but ultimately the glue I will use more often than not is this. Bob Smith makes a fairly good glue. It has the right amount of viscosity, and it lets you select the degree of viscosity in your glue. Now, this is actually a viscosity that's relatively comparable to that of the Gorilla Glue I showed you before, but I just like the way that it comes out, and I like the way that it operates with an accelerant much better. It was actually made to work with an accelerant. BSI actually makes their own accelerant. I don't love their accelerant, actually. If I'm honest, I'm generally going with something made by Zap. Zip Kicker. Now this is in the grand tradition of chemicals that work very well, something that's going to be difficult to find in California or anywhere that particularly cares about the environment. If you live someplace like that, you're probably going to end up having to smuggle it in from someplace that gives a lot less of a care about that sort of thing. But Zip Kicker will almost immediately glue your super glue, meaning that it takes less time to work on a project. I don't think that the bond it makes is as good as if you just sat around and waited for it to glue on its own time, but I don't have enough time to just sit around and wait forever for my glue to decide that it needs to be done. I'm also a big fan of using non-traditional hobby things. These are all India ink pens. Very fine-tipped India ink pens are great for doing detail work and panel work and models. I generally work with something that's going to be maybe 0.5 to 0.3 millimeters. Additionally, an India ink brush pen is fantastic for doing very intricate designs. I like something that you can squeeze and just get the India ink to come out of it. India ink's great because when it dries, you can paint over it, and it's not going to bleed. So you can get very good pattern work. I like it particularly for making checkerboard patterns on scale miniatures, and for painting things where I want to be painting on top of acrylic and creating a very hard outline. I generally go for a Japanese company for this stuff because it's easier to get something that does what I want. There's a range of other India ink pens and various colored pens that are great for detailed work and panel marking work. We'll talk more about these in depth as individual painting projects come up. Speaking of cutting boards, I alluded to this in an earlier video, but I like to have a small cutting board in addition to a large cutting board. I cut towards my hand a lot, and I have historically cut through my fingers before. It's not my favorite thing, so having a little barrier of entry between my hand and what I can be cutting through it is something that I'm a big fan of. I generally have a larger cutting board that I will have on the ground. You can get these at fabric stores for fairly cheap, and a smaller one that you can get at Walmart for about $5. It's absolutely worth the money. Let's talk glue. I use wood glue for a lot of the stuff that I do with harder projects. It's very good for if you're working with corkboard or cardboard, anything that's got a certain amount of wood pulp in it or actual wood to it. But I generally don't use these for flock. It's a little overkill for it, and this kind of glue generally doesn't dry as clear as it advertises. You want a PVA glue, that's to say a standard Elmer's type glue, if you're going to be doing stuff with flock. But this stuff is great for something that you need to stay in place. But for anything that you want to glue down and not actually see that there was an adhesive used in the process, Elmer's glue is your go-to. I keep a lot of alcohol around my hobby space. I use it as a mixer for glue or for paint. It dries significantly faster than working with water, and I prefer the results I get out of it to the results I get out of distilled water or tap water.
Bear in mind, these are my personal thoughts, these are my personal preferences, and these are the result of a large amount of time I've spent in my studio. Please do not take these as gospel. If you have a better way of doing things, if you can show me a better way of doing things, please bring it to the table. This is a collaborative corner, and if you can show me a better way of doing things, I would be very happy either to share it through my channel or to link to your channel so that my viewers can get more skills, more talents. I want to Bob Ross this up, so we're just going to make happy little trees and happy little accidents until everyone knows how to do things pretty on their table. So, happy gaming.